Is that suit from a discount rack? This is a funeral, not a faculty meeting.
It's my grandfather's funeral. He wouldn't have cared what I wore.
Jax, honey, maybe wait by the car until people start leaving.
Mr. Jaxon Cole? My name is Elliot Vance. Your grandfather was the founder and sole owner of Apex Global Energy.
That's not possible. He fixed radios. He grew tomatoes.
As of this morning's valuation, the company is worth $20 billion. You are the sole heir.
The rain hadn't stopped since morning, and neither had the whispers. I stood at the edge of St. Jude's rural chapel, holding an umbrella over a floral arrangement that cost me $42. $42, and I'd still hesitated at the checkout. That's what a high school history teacher's salary does to a person. It makes you calculate grief in decimal points. My grandfather Arthur was gone, the only man who ever looked at me like I mattered, and now he was lying in a plain oak casket inside a chapel so small it could barely hold 30 people. I hadn't expected a crowd. Arthur lived quietly in Oak Creek for as long as I could remember, tending his garden, fixing old radios, telling me stories about the early days that I always assumed were exaggerated. I should have listened closer. Jaxon. I turned, and there was Olivia, my wife of 4 years, her heels sinking into the wet gravel, her face arranged into the particular expression she wore whenever she was about to be humiliated by association. Behind her stood her parents, Richard and Constance Whitfield, real estate royalty, the kind of people who measured a person's worth by the stitching on their shoes. Is that suit from a discount rack? Richard didn't bother lowering his voice. A few of the other mourners glanced over. My God, Jaxon. This is a funeral, not a faculty meeting. It's my grandfather's funeral, I said quietly. He wouldn't have cared what I wore. Well, I care, Constance snapped, adjusting her pearl earrings like they were armor. Do you have any idea who might see us here? The Henderson's driver just pulled up. What if someone from the Larson group is here? I almost laughed. My grandfather had 11 friends left in this world, most of them farmers or retired mechanics, and the Whitfields were worried about being spotted by real estate executives at a burial in a town with one traffic light. Nobody from the Larson group is coming to Oak Creek, I said. That's not the point, Richard said, stepping closer. Close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath even though it wasn't noon yet. The point is, you embarrass this family every single time we're seen together. A schoolteacher. My daughter married a schoolteacher. Do you understand what that costs us at dinner parties? Do you understand how many times I've had to explain why my son-in-law doesn't own a car worth mentioning? Olivia touched my arm, but it wasn't comfort. It was damage control. Jax, honey, maybe you should wait by the car, just until people start leaving. It'll be easier. Easier for who? I wanted to ask. Instead, I said nothing. I'd learned, over 4 years of marriage, that silence was cheaper than arguing. Arguing cost me energy I didn't have, and never won anything anyway. I reached into my coat pocket and closed my hand around the one thing Arthur had left specifically for me. Not in a will, not through a lawyer. Just a note, taped to a small wooden box on his kitchen table 2 weeks before he died. For Jaxon. Keep this close. Everything else will follow. Inside had been his old pocket watch. Brass, scratched, the glass face cracked in one corner. It didn't even keep accurate time anymore, but it was warm in my palm, and it was the only thing in that entire graveyard that felt real. Fine, Richard said, when I didn't move. Stand wherever you want, but when people ask why the widow's husband looks like he wandered in from a bus stop, don't expect me to defend you. The priest began the final prayer. I stood at the back, apart from the Whitfields, apart from Olivia, watching 6 farmers lower my grandfather into the ground with a rope and their bare hands because the funeral home's equipment had gotten stuck in the mud on the access road. Nobody rich enough to matter to the Whitfields was watching. Nobody was watching at all, except me. I thought that was the end of it. A quiet, humiliating goodbye to the only person who ever made me feel like I was worth something, followed by a long, silent car ride home with a wife who couldn't look at me and in-laws who couldn't wait to. I had absolutely no idea that in less than half an hour, everything I understood about my life, my marriage, my grandfather, myself, was about to be pulled apart at the seams. Because as the last shovel of dirt hit the grave, I heard something that didn't belong in Oak Creek. Engines. Not one. Several. Coming up the dirt road toward the chapel, moving slow and deliberate, like they had somewhere very important to be, and had already decided this was it. I looked up. Richard looked up. Even the priest paused mid-sentence. 6 black sedans, polished so dark they looked wet even without the rain, rolled to a stop along the gravel drive. And the doors began to open. Nobody moved. Not the priest, not the mourners, not even Richard, who a moment earlier had been loud enough to wake the dead he claimed to respect so much. The car doors opened in unison, like they'd rehearsed it. Men in dark suits stepped out first. 6 of them, broad-shouldered, earpieces catching the gray light, scanning the graveyard like they were checking it for threats instead of walking into a burial for a retired radio repairman in a town of 800 people. 2 more climbed out and began setting up some kind of perimeter, gently but firmly guiding stunned mourners back a few steps. Then, from the middle sedan, a tall man in a charcoal overcoat stepped out. He had silver hair, a leather folio tucked under one arm, and the kind of calm that only comes from being the most important person in every room he's ever walked into. He didn't look at Richard. He didn't look at Olivia. He didn't look at the priest. He looked directly at me. "Mr. Jaxon Cole?" he asked, his voice carrying easily across the wet grass. I nodded, too confused to form actual words. The man walked toward me, and as he got closer, the security detail parted, like he was the only thing that mattered in the whole graveyard. He stopped a few feet away, and then, to the audible gasp of at least 4 people behind me, he bowed. A full, formal bow, the kind you see in old movies, not at a rural funeral in the mud. "My name is Elliot Vance," he said, straightening up. "I'm the senior managing partner at Whitmore, Vance & Lowell. I apologize for the timing, sir, but the terms of your grandfather's estate required me to make contact within 1 hour of interment. I couldn't wait any longer." "Sir?" Richard repeated behind me, like the word had personally offended him. I finally found my voice. "I don't understand. Who are you? What estate?" Vance's expression softened, just slightly, like he'd expected this exact confusion and had prepared for it with something close to patience. "Mr. Cole, your grandfather, Arthur Cole, was the founder and sole owner of Apex Global Energy." The name meant absolutely nothing to me. I stared at him blankly. "You may not have heard of it," Vance continued, "and that was intentional. Apex operates almost entirely through private subsidiaries and silent partnerships. It is not publicly traded. It does not seek press coverage, but it is, as of this morning's final valuation, worth approximately $20 billion. The graveyard went completely silent, except for the rain hitting umbrellas. "That's not possible," I said, and I meant it. My grandfather fixed radios. He grew tomatoes. He drove a truck that stalled at every stoplight in Oak Creek. You have the wrong person. My grandfather didn't have money. He barely had a working refrigerator. I understand this is difficult to process, Vance said gently, but there is no mistake. Arthur Cole structured his affairs with extraordinary discretion, for reasons I'll explain in full when we meet privately. What matters today is this. Under the terms of his final will, filed and sealed 11 years ago, you are named as sole heir to the entirety of Apex Global Energy. Not a portion, not a trust with conditions attached to other beneficiaries. All of it. I heard Constance make a small strangled sound behind me. There has to be some mistake, I said again, quieter this time, like saying it softer might make it more believable. There isn't, Vance said. He reached into his coat and produced a slim black tablet, its screen already glowing, protected inside a case that looked like it belonged in a bank vault rather than a graveyard. This device contains the preliminary transfer documentation. It's encrypted to your biometric signature specifically. Your grandfather had it configured months in advance. I need only a few minutes of your time to begin the formal process. I looked down at the tablet, then at the pocket watch still clutched in my other hand, then at the muddy grave, where 6 farmers had just lowered a coffin using rope because nothing fancier had been available. None of it made sense together. A $20 billion company and a man who couldn't afford proper burial equipment. Except, it started to make a strange kind of sense. The stories he used to tell me, late at night, about the early days and people who wanted to hurt our family. The way he always seemed nervous around strangers who asked too many questions. The way he told me, more than once, half joking, half serious, if anything ever happens to me, don't trust anyone who suddenly wants to be your friend. I turned around. Richard's face had gone the color of old paper. Constance's mouth was open, no sound coming out. And Olivia, my wife, who 30 minutes ago had asked me to wait by the car so I wouldn't embarrass her, was staring at me like she was seeing a stranger for the first time. "Jax," she said carefully, stepping toward me, her voice suddenly soft in a way it hadn't been all morning. "Honey, is this real?" I didn't answer her. I looked at Vance instead. "Why now?" I asked. "Why here, like this, in front of everyone?" "Because your grandfather insisted on it," Vance said simply. "He wrote very specific instructions. He wanted the reading to happen immediately following burial, in public, without private notice beforehand. I believe," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "he wanted you to understand exactly who stood beside you and who didn't, before any of this changed things." I felt something settle cold and heavy in my chest. My grandfather had planned this. Every detail. He'd known exactly how the Whitfields would treat me at his funeral, known it well enough to build a plan around it, time to the minute. He'd wanted me to see the truth before the money arrived and buried it. I looked at Olivia's hand, still hovering near my arm, not quite touching me now. I looked at Richard, who 30 seconds ago had called me a school teacher like it was a disease, now visibly recalculating every word he'd ever said to me. "Mr. Cole," Vance said quietly, holding out the tablet. "Whenever you're ready." I took it. The screen lit up, waiting for my thumbprint, waiting for me to step into a life I didn't ask for and didn't understand yet. Behind me, I heard Richard clear his throat, his voice suddenly warm in a way it had never been in 4 years. "Jaxon," he said, "son, let's talk about this properly, as a family." I didn't turn around. I pressed my thumb to the screen. The Whitfield estate looked different that night. I'd been here dozens of times over 4 years. Stiff dinners, Holiday parties where I stood in corners, nursing a single drink, because nobody wanted to talk to Olivia's husband, the teacher. But I'd never once seen it lit up like this. Every window glowed gold. Constance had apparently called the housekeeper on the drive over and demanded the good china. For a funeral reception, it felt uncomfortably close to a celebration. "Sit, sit," Richard said, guiding me toward the leather armchair by the fireplace like I was a guest of honor instead of the son-in-law he'd threatened to disown in front of a graveyard 3 hours earlier. "Constance, get Jaxon a drink. The good scotch, not the stuff we serve the Hendersons." "I'm fine," I said. "Nonsense. You've had a shock today." Richard sat across from me, hands folded, his whole posture rearranged into something that was trying very hard to look like warmth. "We all have. I'll admit, son, I may have said some things at the chapel I shouldn't have. Grief makes people say things." Grief. He was calling it grief now. Olivia sat on the arm of my chair, her hand resting on my shoulder. Careful, deliberate. "Jax, we're your family. Whatever happens with this inheritance, we're going to figure it out together, as a team. 3 hours ago, I didn't exist enough to be seen near the good guests. Now I was a team. I appreciate that," I said, because it was easier than saying what I actually felt, which was somewhere between numb and furious. Constance returned with the scotch nobody asked me for and perched on the edge of the sofa, her earlier pearls and panic expression replaced with something calculating. "Jaxon, sweetheart, I know this is overwhelming. $20 billion is, well, it's simply not something a person can manage alone. You've never run a company. You've never even run a household budget, if I'm honest. Dear, Olivia's always handled the finances. That's not exactly what your mother-in-law means," Richard cut in smoothly, "is that you're going to need help, real help, from people who understand large-scale asset management. And frankly, Jaxon, our firm has 40 years of experience handling exactly this kind of wealth. Real estate, trusts, portfolio diversification. It would make sense, practical sense, nothing more, for you to let us manage the financial side while you handle whatever, ceremonial duties come with the company." There it was. 12 minutes into the evening, and they were already trying to get their hands on it. "I don't think I need to decide anything tonight," I said carefully. "Of course not tonight," Richard agreed quickly. Too quickly. "But soon. These things move fast, and you don't want vultures circling before you've got the right people protecting your interests." "People like us," Olivia squeezed my shoulder. "Think about it, though, what this could mean for us. We could finally get out of that cramped apartment, take that trip to Santorini I've always wanted. Honestly, Jax, we could upgrade our entire lives. You wouldn't even have to teach anymore if you didn't want to." I noticed she said, "if you didn't want to," like teaching was a hobby I'd been indulging in, rather than the only thing that had ever made me feel useful before this morning. "I like teaching," I said quietly. "Of course you do, sweetheart," she said. I sat there, holding a glass of scotch I hadn't touched, watching the fire crackle, and I noticed something. Richard's phone, resting on his knee, lit up every few minutes. He'd glance down, thumb quickly across the screen, then look back up at me with that same rehearsed warmth, like nothing had happened. The third time it happened, I caught a glimpse of the screen before he angled it away. Competency eval. Need grounds. Sudden windfall plus no prior asset. MGMT experience plus emotional state post-bereavement equals strong case. Draft the petition tonight. Have it ready. My stomach dropped. I kept my face still. Years of standing in front of teenagers who could smell weakness like sharks had taught me one useful skill. I was good at not reacting. "Everything all right, Richard?" I asked, my voice perfectly even. Fine, fine. He slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. Work never sleeps. Work. He was calling it work. I understood, in that moment, with a clarity that felt almost physical, exactly what was happening. This wasn't a family trying to help me adjust. This was a family trying to build a legal case that I was too fragile, too grief-stricken, too incompetent to manage $20 billion, so that a judge, somewhere down the line, would hand control to the next of kin's spouse's parents instead. To them, my grandfather's voice came back to me, unbidden. Don't trust anyone who suddenly wants to be your friend. He hadn't just meant strangers. You're quiet, Olivia said, studying my face. Just tired, I said. It's been a long day. Of course it has. Constance stood, smoothing her dress. Why don't you stay in the guest suite tonight? No sense driving home in this weather, and we can start looking at paperwork first thing tomorrow. I already had Richard's assistant draft a preliminary management agreement, just to have on hand. Nothing binding, of course, just so we're organized. Nothing binding, a management agreement, drafted before I'd even had dinner. I think I'd rather sleep in my own bed tonight, I said, standing. Jaxon, don't be silly. It's pouring outside, Richard said, and for the first time all evening, his voice had an edge under the warmth, thin but unmistakable. I'll be fine, I said. Thank you for the drink and the concern. Olivia followed me to the door, her hand catching my sleeve. Jax, please. Let's not make this complicated. We're your family. I looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in months, and I thought about the tablet in my coat pocket, still unopened, beyond that first thumbprint, still holding whatever truth my grandfather had spent 20 years hiding. I'll call you tomorrow, I said, and I stepped out into the rain before she could stop me. I didn't drive home. I sat in my car at the end of their long gravel driveway, engine off, rain hammering the windshield, and I opened the tablet Vance had given me. There was a message waiting, one I hadn't noticed at the graveyard. Mr. Cole, before any decisions are made, your grandfather requested you retrieve an item from a secure location in Zurich. It cannot wait. Details attached. EV. I didn't sign a single document that night. I booked a flight instead. Zurich in November felt like a city built entirely out of glass and silence. I'd never been to Switzerland before. I'd never really been anywhere before, if I'm honest. 4 years of marriage to Olivia had somehow never included international travel. Just quiet weekends, where she visited her parents, and I graded essays alone in our apartment. Elliot Vance met me at the airport himself. No assistance this time, no security detail trailing us through customs, just the two of us and a black car that drove through streets so clean they looked freshly painted. You didn't sign anything with the Whitfields, Vance said, watching me from the seat beside me. It wasn't a question. No. Good. He allowed himself something close to a smile. Your grandfather would be relieved to hear that. You knew him well, I said. Didn't you? For over 20 years, Vance said. I was 28 when Arthur Cole hired me, fresh out of law school. No reputation to speak of. He took a chance on me the way, I suspect, he took a chance on very few people in his life. I owe him more than most men owe their own fathers. The bank was called First International, a building so unassuming from the outside that I walked past the entrance twice before Vance gently redirected me. Inside, though, everything changed. Marble floors, silent guards, a vault door thicker than my entire apartment was wide. We were led down 2 levels by a bank officer who never once made eye contact with me, like looking directly at whoever owned this particular box was against some unspoken rule. Vance produced a key. I produced my thumbprint again and a second scan of my retina, which felt faintly absurd for a man who 3 days ago had been grading a stack of 9th-grade history quizzes. The box itself was larger than I expected, more like a small locker than a safe deposit box. Inside, resting on velvet lining, was a slim silver device, shaped like a picture frame, along with a stack of sealed folders and, strangely, a second, smaller wooden box that looked handmade, identical in craftsmanship to the one that had held the pocket watch. "The device first," Vance said quietly, stepping back to give me room. He was very specific. "You alone should activate it." I pressed the small button on its edge. The frame lit up, and a moment later, light folded outward from its surface, resolving into a life-sized, translucent projection of a man I hadn't seen standing upright and steady in over a year. My grandfather. Not the frail version I'd said goodbye to in a hospital bed, not the version I'd watched being lowered into wet ground 3 days earlier. This was Arthur, at maybe 60, silver-haired but strong, standing in what looked like this exact vault room, arms crossed, wearing an expression I recognized instantly. It was the look he gave me every time he was about to teach me something important. "Jaxon," the recording began, and hearing his voice, real, warm, alive, hit me harder than the funeral had. "If you're watching this, I'm gone, and Vance has done his job getting you here quietly. I'm sorry for all of it. The lying, 20 years of it. You deserve the truth, so here it is." He paused, the way he always used to, before saying something he found difficult. Apex Global Energy wasn't always private. 22 years ago, it was public, growing fast, and drawing exactly the kind of attention that fast growth draws. Your parents, my son and his wife, were on the board with me. We were building something real, something that could have changed how half the world got its power. His jaw tightened. There were people who didn't want that. Competitors, mostly. Backed by money even I couldn't trace fully at the time. When your parents' car went off that mountain road, Jaxon, it wasn't an accident. I've spent 2 decades confirming that. Quietly, carefully, without ever being able to prove enough to bring it to court. I felt the floor tilt slightly under me. I'd been told my whole life that my parents died in a car accident when I was 6. A wet road, bad tires, bad luck. Nobody had ever suggested otherwise. After they died, Arthur continued, I made a decision I've questioned every single day since. I took the company private. I buried its true value under layers of shell structures and silent partnerships so deep that even people inside Apex don't know its full scope. I raised you myself, in Oak Creek, far from any of it, and I let you grow up thinking your grandfather was a retired radio repairman with nothing to his name. I did it to keep you alive, Jaxon. I did it because the people who came for your parents would have come for you next, the moment they knew there was an heir worth eliminating. My hands were shaking. I gripped the edge of the vault table to steady myself. The blind trust activates now, at your 30th birthday, following my death. The 2 conditions I built in decades ago, because by this age, I hoped you'd be steady enough, grounded enough, to survive what comes with it. And it will come, Jaxon. The board has members who've been waiting for me to die for a very long time. Some of them are patient, some of them are not. There are people close to you, closer than you think, who will smell the money before they understand the danger attached to it. He glanced toward something off camera, like he was checking a clock only he could see. The smaller box holds the master security credentials, building access, financial override authority, communications with the one board member I still trust completely, a woman named Diane Okafor. Use them carefully, trust slowly, and Jaxon, his voice caught, just slightly, the only crack in 20 years of careful composure. I wasn't just protecting a company, I was protecting the last piece of my son I had left. Don't let them take that from you, the way they took him from me. The projection flickered and dimmed, cutting to a final still image. My parents, young, smiling, standing in front of a building I didn't recognize, my grandfather beside them, all three of them looking impossibly happy. Then it went dark. I stood in that vault for a long time, saying nothing, while Vance waited quietly by the door. "There's one more thing," he finally said, when I'd gathered myself enough to look at him. "Something your grandfather asked me not to tell you until after you watched that recording." "What is it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Vance hesitated, choosing his words with the same careful precision he'd used at the graveyard. "The interim CEO currently running Apex, in your grandfather's absence, a man named Sterling, was hired 11 years ago on the recommendation of one board member in particular. A recommendation your grandfather only recently discovered may not have been as independent as it appeared." "Meaning what?" "Meaning," Vance said quietly, "your grandfather believed, in his final months, that the same interests that took your parents may already have a man sitting inside your own company." Olivia called me every day for a week. I answered most of them. Some part of me, the part that had spent 4 years believing her, choosing her, building an entire life around the idea that she loved me, even when the world reminded me constantly that I didn't fit in hers, still wanted to believe this could be salvaged. She sounded different on the phone, softer. She asked about Zurich, about how I was sleeping, about whether I was eating enough. She didn't ask about the money once. That should have told me something. "There's a place I want to take you," she said on the 7th call, her voice warm in a way that used to make my chest ache with how much I loved her. "The Grand Venetian, downtown, just us, no lawyers, no parents. I promise. I miss you, Jax. I miss us. Can we please just try to find our way back to each other?" I wanted to believe her. That's the part I still can't fully explain to myself, even now, that I flew back from 3 days of closed-door briefings with Vance and Diane Okafor, 3 days of learning just how deep and dangerous my grandfather's world actually was, and some tired, hopeful piece of me still wanted my marriage to be real. I should have called Diane before I walked into that room. I didn't. I wanted, just once, for something in my life to be simple again. The private dining suite at the Grand Venetian was on the top floor, all soft lighting and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. Olivia was there when I arrived, seated at a small table set for 2, a single candle burning between empty plates. For half a second, it looked exactly like what she'd promised. Then the far door opened, and Richard walked in. Behind him came 4 people in identical dark suits, carrying leather folios thick enough to double as doorstops, and behind them a 5th man I didn't recognize but whose face, sharp, cold, calculating, I would come to know very well in the weeks ahead. "Jax." Olivia's hand shot out to grab mine across the table, her expression suddenly urgent. "Please, just hear them out. This is for us, for our future." "You said no lawyers," I said quietly. "I know. I'm sorry. Daddy insisted. Please, Jax, just listen." Richard took the seat across from me, like he owned it, which in every room he'd ever entered before this year, he probably had. "Jaxon, son, I'm not here to fight with you. I'm here because I love my daughter, and I'm not going to watch her marriage and her financial security get thrown away because you're too proud to accept help. One of the attorneys slid a folder across the table before I'd said a single word. I didn't open it. "What is this?" "A petition," Richard said, "for temporary power of attorney over the Apex estate, pending a full competency evaluation, standard procedure, given the sudden and extraordinary nature of the inheritance, your lack of business experience, and, forgive me, son, I say this with love, your documented history of anxiety and emotional distress this past week." "I don't have a documented history of anything." "You will," said the fifth man quietly, speaking for the first time. "By Monday." I looked at him. "And you are?" "Marcus Reyes. I handle reputation management for the Whitfield family." He said it the way another man might say he handled their taxes. "There's a story ready to run in 3 major outlets tomorrow morning. Sources describing your erratic behavior since your grandfather's death, questions about your mental fitness to control a company of this size, concerns raised by close family. It's not personal, Mr. Cole. It's just leverage. It disappears the moment you sign." I felt the old, familiar instinct rise up in me. The instinct to go quiet, absorb it, wait for it to pass. And then, underneath that instinct, something new, something Arthur had left me, along with a company and a fortune and a truth I was still learning to carry. "Olivia," I said, not looking away from Richard, "did you know about this before tonight?" She didn't answer fast enough. That was the answer. "I need you to sign the marital agreement too," Richard continued, sliding a second folder across, unbothered. "It secures Olivia's rightful share as your spouse, regardless of what happens with the estate management. It's only fair, Jaxon. She stood by you. Stood by me. In a chapel 3 weeks ago, she'd asked me to wait by the car. I finally opened my coat and set my own folder on the table, the one Diane Okafor had helped me assemble over the last 2 days, the one I'd hoped I wouldn't need tonight, but had brought anyway, because some quiet instinct had warned me this dinner wasn't what Olivia promised. "Before I sign anything," I said, "I think you should see this." Richard's confident smile flickered, just slightly, as I opened the folder and turned it to face him. Inside were financial records, loan agreements, wire transfers, shell entity filings, all pointing to one clear, damning conclusion. Whitfield Real Estate Holdings, Richard's entire empire, was leveraged nearly to collapse on a series of high-risk loans routed through 3 subsidiaries that, until recently, quietly traced back to Apex Global Energy. "You've been borrowing against a company you don't own for 4 years," I said. "Through channels my grandfather's people were already watching. If Apex called in those loans tomorrow, your firm wouldn't survive the week." The room went silent. Even Reyes stopped writing. That's not accurate," Richard said, but his voice had lost every trace of the warmth he'd manufactured all evening. "It's accurate," I said. "I checked it twice. So did the people who actually understand this company better than either of us." I closed the folder. "You're not here because you love your daughter, Richard. You're here because you're drowning, and you thought I was too soft to notice the water." I stood up. Olivia grabbed my hand again, tears in her eyes now, real ones this time, or real enough. "Jax, please. I didn't know it would go like this." "I believe that you didn't ask," I said quietly. "That's not the same thing as not knowing." I walked out of that private dining suite without signing a single page, leaving 4 attorneys, a reputation manager, a furious father-in-law, and a wife I no longer knew how to look at, sitting in silence around a candle that had almost burned all the way down. The Apex Global Energy headquarters occupied the top 19 floors of Tower 1, a building I hadn't even known existed in Manhattan until Vance walked me through its private entrance. No sign on the building, no logo in the lobby, just a discreet brass plate that said T1 and a security desk that checked my retina scan before letting the elevator move. "Sterling will try to control the room," Diane Okafor warned me on the ride up. She was Apex's longest-serving board member, sharp-eyed, maybe 60, with the kind of steady calm that came from surviving decades in rooms built to intimidate people like me. "He's been running this company for 11 years, without an owner looking over his shoulder. He's not going to hand that back quietly." "What exactly is he planning?" "A share dilution vote," she said. "He'll frame it as protecting the company from instability, an unproven, inexperienced heir suddenly holding full control. He'll propose issuing new shares to a group of strategic partners, which conveniently dilutes your ownership down from majority to minority in a single afternoon. Legal, on paper, devastating, in practice. Can he actually do that? Not if you stop him first," she said, as the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. "Which is why your grandfather gave you those credentials in Zurich. Use them today, not next week." The boardroom was enormous, all dark wood and glass, overlooking a city that had no idea a $20 billion company was hiding in its skyline. 11 board members sat around the table when I walked in, and every single one of them looked at me the way Richard had looked at me at the funeral, like I was something that had wandered in by mistake. At the head of the table sat Sterling. He was younger than I expected, maybe 50, silver at the temples in that deliberate way that suggested he'd chosen it, wearing a suit that probably cost more than a year of my teaching salary. He didn't stand when I entered. "Mr. Cole," he said, a thin smile stretched across his face. "So glad you could join us. I understand you're a history teacher." A few quiet laughs around the table. "I am," I said, taking the seat Diane gestured me toward. "Turns out history's useful. People keep repeating it." Sterling's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. "Well, let's not waste time." Given the extraordinary circumstances of this transition, an inexperienced owner inheriting control with no operational background, the board has prepared a resolution to protect Apex's stability during the adjustment period. He nodded, and a folder was slid to every seat except mine, which felt less like an oversight and more like a message. "The resolution proposes a strategic share issuance," Sterling continued, "bringing in 3 long-term institutional partners to stabilize governance during this period of ownership uncertainty. It's a formality. Really, standard practice." "It's not standard practice," Diane said evenly. "It's a dilution vote, structured to strip Mr. Cole's controlling interest down to 23% by end of business today." "Diane, please," Sterling said, waving a hand like he was swatting away a fly. "Let's not alarm the young man before he understands the mechanics." "I understand the mechanics fine," I said. "I understand you drafted this the same week my grandfather died, which means you were planning it before he was even in the ground." The room went quiet, in a different way now. "That's a serious accusation," Sterling said, his voice cooling several degrees. "It is," I agreed. "So let me back it up." I reached into my coat and pulled out the small silver device Vance had given me back in Zurich, along with a second item, a slim security keycard, black, unmarked, the one Arthur had specifically told me to save for exactly this moment. I placed it on the reader built into the table in front of me, the one I hadn't even noticed until Diane pointed it out during our prep session 2 nights earlier. "What are you doing?" Sterling asked, and for the first time, something in his voice cracked. Not much, just enough for me to hear it. Activating an internal audit override, I said. Founder-level access. My grandfather set it up so that only a direct blood heir could trigger it, which is convenient, because that's exactly what I am. The screens embedded in the boardroom table flickered to life, one by one, in front of every board member. Financial records began populating across them, not the polished quarterly reports I assumed executives usually saw, but raw transaction logs, flagged in red, tracing money through a chain of offshore accounts in the Caymans, Liechtenstein, and finally, a shell company registered in Sterling's wife's maiden name. Over the last 6 years, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, roughly $41 million has been routed out of Apex subsidiary accounts through vendor contracts that don't correspond to any actual services rendered. The audit trail leads directly back to accounts controlled by you, Mr. Sterling. Nobody laughed now. This is fabricated, Sterling said, standing so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. This is a desperate attempt by an unqualified boy to distract from a legitimate governance vote. It's not fabricated, Diane said quietly, reading the same screen I was. I've seen this exact pattern before. I raised concerns about vendor irregularities 18 months ago. I was told they'd been reviewed and cleared. By you, I said, looking at Sterling. The room was completely silent now, every board member's eyes moving between the screens and Sterling's face, watching the color drain out of it in real time. Mr. Sterling, I said, standing myself, feeling something settle into place inside me that I hadn't felt since I'd walked into that graveyard 3 weeks ago as nobody's priority. You've spent 11 years running this company like it was yours, and maybe you got comfortable believing it would stay that way forever. But my grandfather built a system specifically to survive exactly this kind of person. I'm invoking founder authority. You're terminated, effective immediately, pending a full forensic review and referral to federal prosecutors. You can't. I can, I said. I just did. Security appeared at the door within 30 seconds, like they'd been waiting outside the entire meeting. Sterling didn't fight it. He looked at me one last time on his way out, and whatever was in that look, hatred, disbelief, calculation, told me clearly that this wasn't over. Men like Sterling didn't disappear quietly. They regrouped. I sat back down at the head of the table, 11 board members staring at me in a silence that had shifted, somewhere in the last 10 minutes, from contempt to something closer to caution. Well, Diane said quietly, the ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. Welcome to Apex, Mr. Cole. Sterling didn't disappear. Diane had warned me he wouldn't, and 3 days after I fired him in front of the entire board, I understood exactly what she meant. It started with a phone call from Vance, early enough that I was still in the small serviced apartment Apex had arranged for me in Manhattan, staring at a ceiling and trying to remember what my life had looked like a month ago. Turn on the financial news, Vance said. No greeting, which was how I'd learned to recognize when something was genuinely wrong. I found a channel. The anchor's voice was clipped, urgent, the way news voices get when something is falling apart in real time. Behind her, a stock ticker scrolled red. Apex Global Energy, private conglomerate, recently under new ownership following founder's death, facing serious allegations of internal fraud and mismanagement, according to leaked internal documents obtained exclusively by this network. That's impossible, I said. Apex isn't public. There's no stock to crash. It's not about the stock, Vance said grimly. It's about confidence. Half our subsidiary partnerships include exit clauses tied to reputational stability. If enough partners get spooked and pull out simultaneously, it doesn't matter that we're private. The company bleeds value just as fast as if it were. Who leaked it? The documents are doctored, Vance said. Real financial statements, real letterhead, but numbers altered to make it look like the fraud we caught Sterling committing was actually committed by you, under his supervision, as your alleged inexperience created the vulnerability. It's clever. It uses the truth as camouflage for the lie. I already knew who was behind it before Vance said the name. Sterling didn't do this alone, I said. He doesn't have this kind of media reach on his own. No, Vance agreed. Which is why I had someone trace the document's origin point before the story even broke. Marcus Reyes handled the placement. Same reputation manager who threatened you at the Grand Venetian. Richard. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, understanding settling over me like cold water. Sterling had the inside knowledge and the motive for revenge. Richard had the debt, the desperation, and now, thanks to the loan records I'd shown him at that dinner, the very real fear that Apex could crush his real estate empire the moment I chose to call in what his firm owed. He wasn't waiting for me to make that move. He was trying to make it first. There's more, Vance said. Our intelligence team flagged unusual trading activity in Whitfield Real Estate Holdings debt instruments over the past 48 hours. Someone's been quietly buying up distressed positions, betting the story will tank confidence in Apex's partners enough to trigger a broader collapse, which would, conveniently, force a fire sale of several Apex-adjacent assets at a steep discount. Sterling and Richard are trying to profit off crashing the company, I said. That's my read, Vance said. Diane's too. I thought about my grandfather, 20 years ago, watching people circle a company he'd spent his life building, hiding its true scale so those same people couldn't reach it. I thought about the pocket watch in my coat pocket, still ticking unevenly, still the most honest thing anyone had ever given me. Get me Diane and the financial intelligence team, I said. Now and Vance, pull everything we have on Whitfield Real Estate's actual debt structure. Not just what Richard showed me, the full picture. An hour later, I sat in a glass conference room on the 40th floor of Tower 1 with Diane Okafor and a team of 6 analysts I'd met exactly once before, watching numbers scroll across 3 screens simultaneously. Richard's firm is more exposed than even I realized, said a young analyst named Priya, pulling up a debt map that looked like a spiderweb spun by something venomous. He's leveraged against 11 separate properties, 3 of which are secured by loans that mature within the next 6 months. If confidence in his firm drops even slightly right now, creditors call the loans early. He can't cover them, which is exactly why he's trying to bring us down first, Diane said. A crisis at Apex distracts everyone from looking too closely at Whitfield Holdings, and if he can pick up discounted Apex-adjacent assets during the chaos, it might even offset his own losses. Can we stop the story? I asked. You don't stop a story like this, Vance said, joining us via video from his office downtown. You outmove it. I looked at the debt map again, at every red line representing money Richard didn't actually have, borrowed against a future he'd assumed would always favor him. And I thought about every dinner party I'd stood through in silence, every comment about discount suits and worthless teachers. Every moment Richard had made me feel like less than nothing, while quietly building an empire on debt he couldn't cover. He wants leverage, I said slowly. Let's give him some. Buy up his debt. Diane raised an eyebrow. All of it? As much as we can move on quietly, through third parties, before he notices what's happening. If we control enough of what he owes, it doesn't matter what story he plants about us. We hold his entire company by the throat. That's aggressive, Priya said, not disagreeing, just noting it. He came at my company with a doctored story and a media campaign designed to destroy 20 years of my grandfather's work. I said, aggressive, feels appropriate. Diane studied me for a long moment, something like approval settling into her expression. Your grandfather used to say the same thing, almost word for word, back when we fought off a hostile takeover attempt in the 90s. I didn't expect to hear it from a history teacher 3 weeks into the job. Maybe that's the point, I said. He built this company to survive people like Sterling and Richard. Maybe he built me the same way, without either of us realizing it. We worked through the afternoon and into the evening, routing capital through 3 separate holding entities so Richard wouldn't see it coming until it was already done. By the time the sun dropped behind the Manhattan skyline, Apex, quietly, invisibly, through channels Richard would never think to check, controlled 68% of Whitfield Real Estate Holdings' outstanding debt. His entire life's work, built over 3 decades, now sat almost entirely in my hands. He just didn't know it yet. Richard called me 11 times in 2 days. I let all of them go to voicemail. By the 3rd day, the story about Apex had already started losing traction. Vance's team had gotten ahead of it with a coordinated statement backed by verified financials, and once the doctored numbers were exposed publicly as fraudulent, most outlets quietly walked the coverage back. The damage wasn't zero, but it wasn't the collapse Sterling and Richard had been counting on either. The real damage, it turned out, belonged entirely to Richard. Diane called me on the 4th morning, her voice carrying the particular satisfaction of someone watching a plan land exactly where it was aimed. Whitfield Real Estate's creditors just got notified their loans have new holders, she said. Word is spreading fast in that world. People are asking Richard uncomfortable questions about where his real leverage actually sits now. Has he figured out it's us? He will within the hour, if he hasn't already. He had. My phone buzzed 20 minutes later. Not a call this time, but a text from Olivia. Can we talk? Please? Not about the company. About us. I almost didn't respond. Almost. But there was a version of me, the one who still remembered 4 years of a marriage that hadn't always felt like a performance, who couldn't quite let the silence stand. I told her I'd meet her at the house. Our house. The small 2-bedroom place we'd rented in the suburbs before any of this started, back when my biggest financial worry was whether the car would make it through another winter. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on the porch steps in the cold, no coat, like she'd been waiting long enough to stop noticing the temperature. "Hi," she said, standing when she saw me. "Hi." We went inside. The house still smelled like us. Like the candles she used to burn, like the books stacked on my side of the bed that I hadn't finished before everything changed. It felt like walking through a photograph of a life that belonged to someone else now. "My dad's furious," she said, sitting on the arm of the couch, not quite meeting my eyes. "He says you're trying to destroy him, that you bought up his debt out of spite." "I bought up his debt because he tried to destroy my company first," I said. "With a media campaign built on lies, timed to profit off my grandfather's death. Spite would have been easy, Olivia. I could have called those loans in yesterday and ended Whitfield Holdings by lunch. I haven't." "Why not?" "Because it wasn't only him I'd be hurting," I said. "It'd be you too." She was quiet for a long moment, her hands twisting together in her lap the way they used to when we argued about money, back when the numbers were small enough to actually worry about. "I didn't know about the media campaign until it was already running," she finally said. "I swear to you, Jax, I found out the same morning you did." "Did you know about the competency petition? Before that dinner at the Grand Venetian?" She didn't answer right away, and that told me everything. the same way it had that night in the private dining room. I knew he was drafting something, she admitted finally quietly. I told myself it was just precautions. Legal cover. I didn't let myself think about what it actually meant until I was already sitting across from you at that table, watching your face while they slid the folder over. And you still let it happen. I was scared, she said, and for the first time in weeks, I believed the emotion, even if I no longer believed it changed anything. Scared of losing you, scared of my dad, scared of what happens to a person like me when the family checkbook I've depended on my whole life suddenly disappears. I've never had to be anything other than Richard Whitfield's daughter, Jax. I don't know how to be anyone else. I sat down across from her, on the chair that used to be mine, in the living room of a life that no longer fit either of us. I loved you, I said. I want you to know that wasn't a performance on my end. Whatever it was for you. It wasn't a performance, she said quickly, tears starting now, real ones. I loved you too, Jax. I loved the version of us that didn't cost my family anything, and I hate myself for that. I really do. I reached into my coat and pulled out a folder I'd been carrying for 2 days, hoping I wouldn't need it, knowing somewhere underneath that hope that I would. This is a divorce agreement, I said, setting it on the coffee table between us. It's already drafted. Fair, generous even. More generous than most lawyers would advise. There's a trust fund attached, enough that you'll never have to worry about money again, no matter what happens with your father's company. It's separate from Apex entirely. It's yours, free and clear. No strings. She stared at the folder like it might bite her. And what about my family? Executive access, board relationships, all the… Gone, I said, gently but firmly. The trust is for you, Olivia, not for them. I won't have your father or your mother anywhere near anything connected to Apex. Not now, not ever. That part isn't negotiable. You're really doing this, she said, not quite a question. I think we both already did this, I said, a long time before the funeral. We just didn't have the money involved yet to notice. She cried for a while after that, and I let her, sitting quietly across from her, the way I used to sit quietly through every dinner party, where I hadn't mattered enough to defend. Except this silence felt different. This one belonged to me. I'm sorry, she said finally, wiping her eyes, reaching for the folder. For all of it, the suit comment, the funeral, everything, I let them turn me into someone I don't even recognize. I know, I said. I hope you find your way back from that. I mean that. I stood, and for a moment, neither of us moved, 20 feet and 4 years compressed into one quiet room. Goodbye, Jax, she said softly. Goodbye, Olivia. I walked out of that house for the last time, carrying nothing with me but the pocket watch in my coat, and for the first time since the funeral, the weight in my chest felt less like grief and more like something finally set down. 2 months is not a long time. It felt like 10 years. By the time I stood backstage at the Apex Energy Global Summit in Geneva, waiting for my name to be called, I barely recognized the man reflected in the dark glass of the wings. The suit I wore now wasn't off a discount rack. Diane had insisted on that much. Not out of vanity, she'd said, but because the room needs to see you as someone who belongs in it, even if you don't feel that way yet. But underneath the tailored jacket, in the inside pocket, was the same cracked pocket watch my grandfather had left me, ticking unevenly, the only thing I'd carried through all of it. Sterling was gone, under federal investigation now, the embezzlement case building into something far larger than the 41 million we'd first uncovered. Richard's real estate empire hadn't collapsed, not entirely. I'd made sure of that. restructuring the debt Apex now held into manageable terms, rather than calling it in for spite, the way he would have done to me without hesitation. He'd lost the leverage, lost the arrogance that came with it, and I'd heard through Diane that he'd started actually running his business again instead of scheming his way around it. Constance sent me a card at Christmas. I hadn't decided yet whether to respond. Olivia I heard from once more. A short letter, not asking for anything, just telling me she'd started therapy and moved to a small apartment on her own. First time in her life paying her own rent. I hoped it was true. I hoped it stayed true. 2 minutes, Mr. Cole, a stage assistant said, touching my elbow. Diane appeared at my side, sharp as ever in a navy suit, a small, knowing smile on her face. Nervous? Terrified, I admitted. Good, she said. Your grandfather was terrified before every major decision he ever made. He just never let anyone see it before the outcome proved him right. She straightened my jacket lapel, an oddly maternal gesture from a woman who ran boardrooms like military campaigns. He'd be proud of you, Jaxon. I mean that. I keep waiting to feel like I've earned any of this, I said. The company, the money, this stage. Some mornings I still wake up and think I'm going to be late for third period. You earned it the moment you didn't sign those papers, she said. Everything since then has just been you proving it wasn't luck. The lights shifted. My name echoed through the hall in 3 languages. I walked out onto a stage in front of 4,000 people. Energy ministers, industry leaders, journalists from every major outlet on Earth. The same stage where, 6 months ago, my grandfather had been scheduled to speak before illness made the trip impossible. Vance had told me that detail only that morning, and I understood, finally, exactly why this location had mattered so much to him. I looked out at the crowd, and for one disorienting second, saw the graveyard in Oak Creek instead. 6 farmers lowering a coffin with rope, nobody watching who mattered, nobody applauding anything. Then I found my voice. 6 months ago, I began. I was a high school history teacher. I taught 14-year-olds about empires that rose and fell, about the men and women who built things meant to last, and the ones who tore them down, chasing something smaller than what they already had. I never imagined I'd be standing on a stage, explaining that I'd inherited an empire of my own, one my grandfather spent 20 years hiding, protecting, and quietly building into something the world didn't even know existed. A murmur moved through the crowd. I kept going. Arthur Cole built Apex Global Energy into a $20 billion company without a single press release, without his own grandson knowing what he'd built, because he was protecting the people he loved from forces that had already taken everything from him once. He taught me, without ever telling me directly, that real power isn't loud. It's not measured by who shows up to your dinner parties or what suit you wear to a funeral. A few knowing smiles from people who'd clearly read the leaked story about my in-laws, months ago now, already fading into gossip. Real power is what you build quietly, carefully, for the people who come after you. I paused, letting the room settle. Today, I'm announcing that Apex Global Energy is stepping fully into the light, not to chase headlines, but to fulfill the vision my grandfather spent his entire life protecting. We're converting our entire infrastructure portfolio to open-source clean energy systems over the next 5 years, making our core technology freely available to developing nations who could never afford to license it otherwise. We're establishing the Arthur Cole Foundation, funding energy access in the communities that need it most, starting with towns exactly like the one I grew up in, towns nobody expects an empire to come from. The applause started slowly, then built, spreading through the hall in a wave that felt, for a strange moment, like something physical pressing against my chest. I reached into my jacket and closed my hand around the pocket watch, the way I had at the funeral 3 months earlier, except everything about the gesture felt different now. That day, it had been the only thing keeping me steady in a world that had made it clear I didn't belong. With today, it felt like proof that the quiet, unnoticed version of me who'd stood in the rain at his grandfather's grave had been carrying something worth more than anyone in that graveyard understood. I thought about Richard, calling me worthless in front of the chapel. I thought about Sterling, dismissing me as an inexperienced boy who didn't belong in a boardroom. I thought about every person who'd looked at a discount suit and decided that told them everything they needed to know about the man wearing it. They'd been wrong. Not because I'd become someone else, standing on this stage, but because they'd never bothered to see who I already was. My grandfather used to tell me, I said, closing my remarks, that the measure of a man isn't what he inherits, it's what he protects and what he chooses to build with it. I looked out at the crowd one last time, the pocket watch still warm in my palm. I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure he was right. The applause rose around me, and somewhere underneath it, quiet and steady, the old watch kept its broken, imperfect time, exactly the way it always had, ticking forward, no matter what the world around it decided to believe.